So I'm Don Scavia. I'm the director of the Graham Environmental Sustainability Institute here at the University of Michigan. I'm also a professor of natural resources and environment and a professor of civil and environmental engineering. The project itself, what stimulated it for us was we knew that there were lots of impacts being demonstrated in lots of different places in the Great Lakes. And what we were trying to find was some way to measure what the impacts were lake scale, to understand whether it's a large-scale phenomenon or a lot of local small-scale phenomena. We had been running EPA's biological surveillance program for the last several years, and so we knew that every year, twice a year, they go out and collect basic chemical, biological information on all 5 lakes, and have been doing it since the 80s. So we thought, what if we were to look at how the chemistry in the lakes have changed to see if that is giving us some indication of what the overall productivity of the lakes are, how those have changed, and what may be causing that. So the study, the report that we did, looked at the change in silica concentration. Silica is one of the required elements for phytoplankton growth, so it gives us a measure of how much productivity there is at the base of the food chain. And what we found was the springtime silica concentration had been increasing gradually over time, which was very consistent with the phosphorus control strategies put in place in the 70s here in the Great Lakes. So the lakes were responding the way we wanted to, and that productivity was gradually slowing, which is what we wanted to control eutrophication, the algae problems. But what we were surprised at was what we looked at the difference between the spring silica concentration and the summer silica concentration, which was a measure of how much productivity there was during the year. It changed dramatically in the early 2000s. It changed in the direction of dramatically reducing the amount of productivity at the base of the food chain in both Lake Michigan and Lake Huron, and system-wide in both lakes. So overall, the productivity of both lakes have decreased so much that they're almost as pristine as Lake Superior. That caused great concern for us. So when we saw these large changes in the early 2000s, we were looking at, well, what could have caused that? Anything that was changing the loading of nutrients to the lakes would have been a very gradual change, as we saw prior to the 2000s. But something in the early 2000s had to happen, and it was probably a biological effect, because only biology can act that fast at this scale. And it turns out that the introduction or the invasion of the zebra and the quagga mussels coincided with those large changes. In the early 2000s, in the lower Great Lakes and in the upper Great Lakes, first the zebra mussels came in, then the quagga mussels came in behind them, and the timing was almost perfectly coincident with this large decrease in productivity. So while nothing's ever proven for sure, the correlation was just astounding, and it was really pretty solid that those were the causes. So the quagga mussels following the zebra mussels was where we saw the large impact, and because the quagga mussels can go deeper into the lakes, they can cover more of the territory, and in many places the quagga mussels have replaced the zebra mussels, and so it was this sort of this cousin that came in that caused a second round of problems. So we're seeing 2 different kinds of effects. One is with the stripping of the algae out of the water column, the water's getting much clearer in a lot of places, and that tends to, a lot of people like that. In fact, that is a very nice outcome. But what it's allowed is the sunlight to get to the bottom of the lake in many places, and it's producing large populations of Cladophora, which is a bottom algae. Large mats of these, and in storm actions they break loose and they come up on shore, colloquially called muck. And so one of the consequences of this clearer water is that a lot of this productivity is going into the bottom and it's coming up on shore, causing great problems in some of the areas in Lake Erie, but also in the northern part of Lake Michigan, and places that are typically thought of being quite pristine. So that's one effect. The second one, and the one that I think is probably more ultimately profound, is it's removing the food source for these wonderful fisheries that we have here in the Great Lakes. I mean, the salmon fishery and the lake trout fisheries in Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are wonderful. And there's a great economic base for that, great recreational fishing associated with it. There's no food left for those fish. We've seen declines in the amount of fish that are taken from Lake Huron, and the size of the fish have gone down. And we're worried that that is actually going to move into Lake Michigan next. And that's the big concern that I have at least. I mean, ecosystems adjust, and so there's the timing. So the zebra and the quagga mussels in Huron first, before Michigan, so there's a delay in that. And when the food base changes, then the ecosystem changes, and different zooplankton and other sort of prey fish can adjust to it. And then the top fish will adjust to that. But eventually, when the food runs out, there's not much you can do. The one thing that I found interesting is in Lake Huron, when the alewife and other species, which are the main prey species for the top fish, collapsed, there was conversations, discussions about actually providing an opportunity to restock native fish. So there may be some silver lining in all this. I'm not sure that's gone very far, but that's something that was at least talked about early on in Huron. I believe that what we've shown is that the productivity in Lakes Michigan and Huron are about 80% below what they were prior to the zebra and the quagga mussels coming in. And in fact, productivity and the phosphorus levels in the lakes are lowest that we have ever seen since we've started making the measurements. Well, so the loss of productivity is a loss of productivity of the single-celled plants, and that is the base of what everybody eats. And so it will affect all the way up through the zooplankton, the prey fish, and the top fish, and the trophies at the top.
Yeah.
Yes. So the real problem with this problem is that there's very little we can do about it now. Once the zebra mussels and the quagga mussels have come into our system and have taken over in this sense, there's very little we can do about it. So the only thing we could have done is prevent them from coming in the first place.